Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next lecture in the lecture series called British Literary Analysis. Please ignore the whiteboard for now, that is still from last week. I just want to use that for the recap in a couple of seconds, and after that, it will be gone. Welcome to our, second lecture where we have a look at, actual literary analysis, while it's actually already the fourth lecture in the series. We are still at Old English literature, but before we come to that and back to last session and to today's topic, let's get to some housekeeping items first. There are two major things I want to talk about. One is a little more based on the content, and one is a little more focusing on the way this lecture works. So let me start with that one. It is very important that you use the last lecture video and this one to really give me some feedback. You can do that in private via mail or the discussion forum in our lecture course. Also, please have a look at the lecture course. I really put a lot of effort, a lot of work in there, and it's really worth using. Or you can give feedback in the comment section below. Now, the last couple of lectures, especially those two, the last one and this one, that are actually focusing on literary analysis, I've captured them, not directly after each other, but just, I think I captured the Beowulf one like 2 days ago, but you only see this video like 2 weeks later because of my uploading schedule. But that means that I cannot take your feedback that you perhaps already wrote underneath the Beowulf session in account, because I couldn't wait that long until this video went online to capture this one for private reasons. However, the next lecture, the first one on Middle English, there will be a short break now. Like this next lecture only goes online in late January, so there's like 1.5 months of break. So I can definitely take in any kind of feedback, response, critique, hopes, wishes, questions. I can take them now. So this is really the best opportunity to give me some feedback now, because of course I want these lectures to be as accessible and as nice to listen to as possible for you out there. You know, these lectures aren't for me, basically, they are for you. So this is the best opportunity for some feedback now, because I can consider everything of that until the next session. Okay, and then there's another question that occurred content-wise. You have to know that I send these lectures to sometimes one, sometimes two people before I upload them, so they can have a look at it, give me some feedback, but they are more like academic friends, so they have another point of view than perhaps you viewers have on these lectures, so they rather give me academic hints. And there was one thing that someone asked of these people that I also want to present to you, and that is if I could perhaps work with more quotes from the texts we are working on. Now, I try to bring in some secondary literature quotes here and then, like the quote from How to Call Mama last session, not last week. And of course, also we spoke about the first 4 lines of Beowulf, but now obviously Beowulf has how many lines? Almost 3,200 lines. So only quoting 4 of them might not be that representative. I get that feedback. However, I'm struggling a little with directly quoting from the text. Now, sometimes, like today, in today's lecture, I will actually quote the whole text because it's just 10 lines. I can do that. But there are two fears that I have when we are talking about larger texts when quoting more. First of them is copyright reasons. I don't really know, where there is this border of having quoted too much of the content. Now, obviously, I cannot give you the whole text if they are not available for free on the internet, like Beowulf. So if we were to, I like to bring in that example, if we were to talk about Harry Potter, I cannot upload the whole book to you. And I'm also, a little unsure on how much I am, so to say, allowed to quote. If I were to quote one sentence from each page or each chapter only, would that already be troublesome? I don't really know that in this non-commercial video thing context. I don't really know, so I'm a little unsure about that. And the other thing is just time reasons. Last week's lecture was over an hour long, and I'm planning to never do that again. I really want these videos to be shorter than an hour. And I think if I were to bring in more direct quotes from the text and discuss them with you, it would just take lots of more time. So, and instead I could just reference to, certain chapters or scenes in a text. And the last thing is also, if we were in a seminar context where we had direct interaction, we could really discuss topics and citations, lines. But in this lecture format where I just talk to you, I think it's sometimes not that useful to use too many quotes from in the text, and rather instead give you an overview, like we did that with Beowulf. And speaking of Beowulf, in the video about Beowulf, I told you that I also have a copy of Beowulf and Seamus Heaney's complete translation side by side, and I promised to show it to you once I have it back, and since I do have it back now, I just wanted to show it to you. For the research on Beowulf, I also used two other books, but I only borrowed them from the library. One is by the Norton Critical Classics, also including Seamus Heaney's translation, but some more comments on that. And the other one is actually J.R.R. Tolkien's analysis and translation of Beowulf, because he did that as well. Now, enough of the housekeeping stuff. Let's get to the recap and to the actual topic of today. Okay, so I made a short break and I accidentally cleaned the whiteboard, even though I just said I wanted to use all of that for the recap. Okay, well, doesn't really matter. I think it would have helped, but can't change that now. If you download the script of this week's lecture, then at your slide number 5, you still have like almost everything that was right here, right now. So you might have to use the script now. So last time, I'm always trying to say last week, but it wasn't last week. We spoke about the story called Beowulf, which is probably the most well-known text of Old English literature, even though it's not the first one. And it was, one cannot definitely say when it was created, but it was definitely created in a Christianized Anglo-Saxon British Isles, while the story takes place actually at a time before that. And you can see the influence of Christianization on the paganism that was there before. Also, we have to keep in mind when we think about Beowulf that back then there was a whole different notion of literature. So we had oral culture in connection to literature as well. So texts were not just written down. They were composed to be memorized, and that happened through the Old English verse, which we will talk about again today. We only briefly mentioned it and just, well, I showed you some characteristics of it, but we will go into more detail on how to analyze Old English verse today. Beowulf is about a hero that basically kills 3 monsters, and these are the 3, so to say, chapters of the story, even though they aren't really chapters, but the 3 main parts. That is the macro structure of the text. And basic themes of Beowulf were heroism, death, revenge, mythology, Christianization, and so on and so forth. You can have more details about that by watching the previous lecture. But today we will deal with something different, and something actually completely different, but still at first sight so similar. That is Katman's hymn. Now, something that's very important to say, it is usually referred to as Katman's hymn, that one might believe that this is actually like the name of the text. Like Beowulf was called Beowulf, but it was, if we would know that, for example, the original composer of Beowulf was called, I don't know, Gefurson or so, or the like. Why did I say that in German oder so? It doesn't matter. Then we could say like Gefurson's Beowulf, you know? And this is what happens when we talk about Katman's hymn, because Katman is actually the, so to say, author of a text just called the hymn, but one usually refers to this text as Katman's hymn. But Katman is not a character in a story or so. No, it's actually the creator of that story, which is a rarity, but we will talk about that in a second. I think over the course of this lecture you will pretty much see what I mean by it is completely different, while at first looking very similar. And we will come there, and we will talk about more about context, content, and of course style. I think this might actually be our main focus today. But before that, I want to present Katman's hymn to you. Actually, I want to read it to you completely. It is only 9 lines long. I think in the introduction I said 10 lines, which is not correct. I'm sorry. I will read it to you, the West Saxon version of it. And now, before though, I want you to try something out. In the lecture course, under this lecture, so at December 14, there is a PDF file called Katman's Hymn and Translation. There you find the original Northumbrian version, then the West Saxon version, and then a modern English translation. And I will be working with the West Saxon version now because actually I'm my Old English is not too good, but I really don't know much about Northumbrian pronunciations. I think it might be very similar, but I know a little more about West Saxon pronunciation, so I will try to work with that, but it doesn't make a difference, especially not in content, just in how it is spelled. Maybe it's pronounced the exact same way. I don't really know that. I don't want to do it wrongly then, so I will focus on the West Saxon version, which is also in this document. And now, before I read it to you, I've written down here, I would like you to have a look at the West Saxon version at number 2, and try to read it in your head. Just pause this video for a second and read it aloud, this West Saxon version. You can also record it. I think that would be very cool if you recorded yourself doing so. then listen to me and then listen to your own recording again, and try to compare how close it was to how it's actually pronounced. Also, feel free to send this recording to me via the online lecture course. I will activate a upload function for that. I would, I remember my first time reading the West Saxon version, and I made so many mistakes. So I would be very interested in just listening to your first attempts. Now, of course, I would not make them public, and you don't have to do that. But if you want to, I think that would be quite a cool and perhaps even funny thing. So pause the video now, try to read out aloud the West Saxon version, and maybe record yourself, then keep going, because after a couple of seconds now, I will read it aloud to you. Okay, so pause now if you haven't already. I'll give you 5 more seconds, just in case. Great. Okay, should be back by now. Break's over. Now let me read to you the Old English West Saxon version of Katman's hymn. As I said before, my Old English is not too good, so it might not be 100% correct, but I'm trying my best. Nu schulen herrian heaven reaches word, meo todes machte an des moodje thank, werk wol de feda, so he wundra je wes, eetje drichte norris telde. He erst shop jelda bernum, heaven to rofe heilig shippend, the midden yard mankenes word, eetje drichten efter teode, virum foldan Freya allmächtig. Okay, so much about that. I think it might sound very different to what you expected. Of course, we had a look at Beowulf already, so you might have some ideas about how some things are pronounced, but we are not here to learn Old English as such, right? So if you still have the PDF file open, you can scroll down, and at the bottom of the document there should be a modern English translation of the Katman's hymn as well. And once again, I would like you to either listen to me or read it by yourself, but I will now also quote the modern English translation that I have provided. Now we must praise Heaven Kingdom's guardian, the Creator's might and his mind plans, the work of the glory Father, when he, of wonders of everywhere, eternal Lord, the beginning established. He first created for men's sons heaven as a roof, holy Creator, then Middle Earth, mankind's guardian, eternal Lord afterwards made, for men earth, Master Almighty. This translation was taken from the Norton published Donaldson and Howe book called Beowulf, a prose translation, background, context, and criticism, 2nd edition. And yes, even though it's Katman's hymn, it was in this Beowulf book. Now, now that you have heard Katman's hymn both in modern day English so that everyone can understand it, and also in the original, I think it is quite clear what the themes and the content of Katman's hymn is. So we will first talk about themes and content now, because there isn't really much to say. It is obviously a religious text, a Christian religious text, that talks about God, the creation of the earth. And yeah, I would say that if we were to talk about themes now, we could say probably God, religion, and as I just said, creation of the earth. And that is basically everything there is to the content and the themes as such. If we just have this superficial look at this very short poem. But of course, there is a little more to the poem as such, especially when we have a look at style and form. But before we go there, let us talk about some context of Katman and Katman's hymn. Swoosh, and suddenly everything changed. That is me and the date when it goes online. It constantly said December 14th. Now it's 21st, and that's the actual date. And there are some new things here as well. I'm sorry, I was quite in some time dilemma, and things had to change a little. But I think we stopped at the context of Katman's hymn. So let's just start right ahead and get this done. So I think we already talked about that Katman's hymn is actually not like the title of the text, but it is a hymn or a text called Hymn by Katman. Now, that does sound rather odd if you think about the last lecture about Beowulf, where I told you that in the Old English times there weren't really authors, and which is also why Beowulf is always referred to as by anonymous, right? And yeah, that is quite special because Katman is one of the very, very few named people, like people we know the name of today, who wrote or created things. I'm still reluctant to use the word author because the notions were just so different at that time. But yeah, he is one of 12 people whose names we know of, and he's actually the first. Katman lived in the second half of the 7th century as a monk and, let's say, animal caretaker of what is today known as Whitby Abbey. Now, how do we know of Katman and his hymn? How, since it was the 7th century and we already talked about how there are barely any records of that time, how do we know he existed in that way? That is thanks to the Venerable Bead. I think we already talked about him in the last lecture when we were talking a little about historical context. Now, the Venerable Bead was the first to actually write down a legit historical report of that time, the first in the British context. In his, where should I put it? Let's put it here. Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum. This is where he wrote lots of stuff down that is very important for us to know nowadays as history, so we actually know what went on at this time. And he also wrote about Katman. He wrote down his hymn, described him as who he was, the monk at Whitby, taking care of animals. He was also an illiterate, not Venerable Bead, but Katman. And he described him as, I think, someone with very strong musical talent as well. Okay, but so much about themes and context, content. We talked about these things a lot when we talked about Beowulf, and don't want to spend more time on this now. Instead, let's have a closer look at the style of Katman's hymn. I wrote down lines 4 to 9, just as a reference. We will be looking at the 5th to 8th line now. And yeah, we'll analyze it in a way. We'll analyze it. Have a look at it. But first, let's repeat again. Old English literature. What does that mean? Mostly, those things are written in the so-called Old English long line. That is in pagan heroic verse. And by the way, again, here's this connection that we also had with Beowulf, and that is quite typical for Old English literature. The people at that time knew both pagan and Christian ways. We spoke about that last time. Try to remember. And this is always found in these Old English long lines, because this form of writing is actually a pagan form of writing, but the content here is always Christian, right? So Christianity meets paganism, so to say. Actually, before we have a look at style and form, I want to tell you something else that might be quite interesting for you. When we talked about Beowulf, I already told you there are some connections to Tolkien's The Hobbit, and there are actually more connections in Old English literature in general to Tolkien's works. And we can find it here again. This is also where, for the first time, the term Middle-earth occurred, or as it's called here, Midden-Yard, right? And to those of you who don't know, actually Middle-earth is a term that was there before. I think it also came up in the Bible. I'm not too sure right now, to be very honest. But I want to explain to you what is Middle-earth. What does that mean? And to those of you who don't know it but are a fan of Lord of the Rings, don't worry, Middle-earth is not just the name of the world of the Lord of the Rings. Actually, Middle-earth is something completely different. It's not a name of a planet or whatever, but when we think of Christian ways, which we have to in context of Old English literature, and for quite some hundreds of years, of course we know we have heaven and we have hell, right? Heaven supposed to be above us, hell below. But what is in between? In between, there's us and our world, our earth, right? And this is basically everything this term means. We are in between heaven and hell. That makes us being at Middle Earth. So yeah, that's not just the name of the world of the Lord of the Rings. This is sad. I actually have to mention this because I met many people who thought that Middle Earth is just the name of the world of the Lord of the Rings. Now let's talk about style and form. As I said before, we will focus on lines 5 to 8. Now, as I said before, this is written in pagan heroic verse. That means we have Old English long lines. A long line, as you can see here, is a line consisting of 2 half lines, and they are broken in the middle by a pause called the caesura, right? And each of these half lines has 2 stressed syllables. Apart from that, these lines are connected via initial rhymes, mostly through alliterations, so we don't have an end rhyme scheme that is very usual in our days today. No, but it rhymes at the start and mostly through alliteration, so through words that start with a similar or the same sound. Let's have a look how that works for these lines. Okay, let's start with the most obvious one, the caesura. If I write it down like this, which is the typical way to write down Old English verses, you can see there is this break in the middle and it's everywhere. So I think we don't have to analyze that. This is a caesura, this as well, and that, and this one, and this one, and this as well. Quite obvious, isn't it? Also, long lines split into 2 half lines should be quite obvious, right? Now let's have a look at the rhyme scheme first and then at the stressed syllables. Let's start with line 6, 7, and 8. I will explain to you in a second why. And we will start having a look at the initial rhymes. What is very important to note here is that the rhyme scheme does not go from long line to long line, but always from half line to half line. So that means we do not have to look for initial rhymes between. So you could think, as someone who isn't really who's new to this topic, that Hearest and Heaven, that this is an initial rhyme, and basically it is, but this is not how we have to analyze it, because then Heaven and Tha and Eche and Firum, Eche, Her, there is no other initial rhyme from long line to long line, right? Doesn't make any sense. We have to look from half line to half line. So we have Heaven to Rolfe and Heilig Schippen, right? H and H, Heaven, Heilig. Same sound to start. We have Middenyard and Mankenes word. We have Edgedrichten after Theode. It's not the exact same sound, but it's very similar, right? Edge and after. And we have Firum Faldan Freya Allmächtig. I think it should be quite obvious. H to H, M to M, E to A, F to F. Sometimes it happens that there is a word at the start which kind of puts the rhyme back, and that happens. Just happens. This is why you have to analyze it. However, line 5 is a little more difficult to me, I have to be honest, because I'm not sure if I'm wrong or right. So I will tell you my idea of how the 5th line rhymes initially, and you can tell me in the comment section below what you think, because I have 2 ideas and I'm not completely sure. You could either say that the he, like the tha, is not part of the rhyme, and then Erist and Yelda sound quite similar, so that the rhyme is from Erist to Yelda. However, I sometimes think that it could also be he to e, because if you speak out the whole line, actually those Herest sounds quite similar to the start of that. If I read it out again, it's Herest shop Helda Bernum, right? Herest Helda. So one could think that the initial rhyme is completely from here to there, but I'm not sure. It could also be that the initial rhyme is only from the Erist, and the he is not at all regarded in the initial rhyme, like the tha in the Middenyard Mankenes word. I'm not sure. I would really love to hear your ideas about that. Okay, the stressed syllables should be quite easy again. There are 2 per half line, and sometimes this is allowed to differ, but it doesn't happen very often. So let's have a look. Let's read it out. I will read it out. Maybe you can think then, what could it be? Where are the stressed syllables? And then I will write them down for you. So let's start again with line 5. Hierist shop Helda Bernum. Erist shop Helda Bernum. Heaven to Rolfe, heilig schippend. Heaven to Rolfe, heilig schippend. The Middenyard Mankenes word. Now, I would once again would like to ask you, pause the video and write in the comment section below, where do you think in the first half line of line 7, the Middenyard, where are the stressed syllables? You may continue the video now, I think you have. Middenyard. As with the initial rhyme, this tha is not stressed, and this is also why it is not part of the initial rhyme. If you were to have tha as a stressed syllable, then this would also create the initial rhyme. But we have Middenyard Mankenes word, and it's not stressed. This is why it's disregarded. And this is also here why he might be disregarded and the initial rhyme is at e, right? Because he is not stressed. And for the last, it's Edgedrichten after Theode. It's actually quite simple, because mostly In most of the cases, it's just the first non-consonant. Of course, I mean vowel. Sorry. I'm studying this and I can't remember the word vowel. That is bad, actually. Now, sorry, sometimes you forget the most important words. Well, so as you can see in Old English lines, the stressed syllables are mostly at the first vowel at a word, like eristrid, chop, ielda, bernum, havent, rofe, heilig, shippend, midden, yard, manken, swerd, edge, richten, after, theode, virum, folden, freya, allmächtig. So, quite simple. It is not too difficult to analyze these in that way. I left out the fourth line now, and this was on purpose, because I have some kind of, let's say, homework. Homework sounds not good. Let's say an option of interaction between you and me. Okay, so there is a task for you that I have prepared. I want you to think about something, to come up with a theory, perhaps, or you have a solution already. We have talked about these initial rhymes and stressed syllables and stuff. However, the fourth line produces something that would seem rather odd for us if we have a look at those rules we talked about now. And that is the initial rhyme from Erche Drichten to Or Estelde. Now the initial rhyme obviously is at the start. So you cannot say like the initial rhyme would be Drichten to Estelde. I heard people say the initial rhyme then is from Drichten to Estelde. That is wrong. The initial rhyme has to be somewhere in the first words. But how? Even if we don't look at end rhymes, but at initial rhymes, how would Eche and Or be an initial rhyme? Doesn't make any sense. Or does it? If you have an idea, I want you to do one thing, and you have two options for that. I want you to write this theory to me. There are two options. Of course, you can use the comment section below on YouTube. However, as you might remember, there is a learning platform that I have created for you on jeffmalum.com. Link is in the video description below, including the password for this page. And there is a symbol at the top with, like, it's a green symbol with a pen in it. And it leads to a discussion forum, to a Padlet. And you can write it down there and discuss with me and with others. That is a great opportunity to have some interaction. And I would really love to listen to your ideas. What is the thing here? Doesn't that sound awkward? Is there perhaps no initial rhyme? What might be the thing there? If you write this to me, you can also write me an email, of course. Third option. And I will, of course, answer to your theories. I'm not too sure if I will post the solution. Like my first idea was to make you think about it and then in the next lecture tell you what is the solution. However, I'm not sure if I want to do this, right? So you will definitely get the answer if you write me an email with your theory, and if you discuss in the Padlet, I will definitely tell you when there's the right answer. If not, I would perhaps give you the solution in the next lecture. But yeah, think about it. What is odd about the initial rhyme in line 4? And this, I think, concludes today's session, and with that also concludes Old English literature. I have another question for you, and I would really, really, really be happy if you participate in that. And that is your opinion. First of all, as I said at the start of this lecture, this would be a perfect opportunity to give me some feedback. The next lecture, by the way, we'll talk about it in a second, it will come at the start of February. So the complete January will be a break for the lecture series, also because we are switching literary period. And this would be a great opportunity for me to use some of your feedback. But what I would also be very, very interested in is how you liked Old English literature. Have you read Beowulf and Katman? What did you like? What didn't you like? I personally can say I have mixed feelings about Old English literature because it is, of course, very religious. There's always strong signs of Christianity, and I have some trouble with very religious texts. And of course, as you can see here, if you don't write a translation, if you don't read a translation or learn Old English, which is obviously completely different to modern day English, you can't really read it, right? Also, you basically need books like this where you have a side-by-side translation. One is Old English, one is modern day English. I learned some Old English, but it's not enough to understand a whole book in Old English literature. Yeah. However, what I really like about Old English literature is, first of all, it was completely new, right? Which is why it is inspiration for many stories today still, especially Beowulf, as you can see with the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. But also I like the sound of that. When I just read through it, especially also the start, Nu skjul on Herren, heaven riches words, mea todes macht, and the small and so on, you really feel like you are set 2,000 years back. And I personally like it. But of course, it's weird if you don't understand a word. So yeah, I would really love your opinion. Would really love to hear your opinion. I'm not sure if I would love your opinion, right? Okay, so much about that. As you can see, we don't have to talk more about Old English literature because it all is very similar, right? If you watch the last lecture of Beowulf and this one, you will see that there are barely any huge differences, right? This, of course, will differ the further we go in time. There will still be not too many of these theme differences and so on in Middle English literature, but if we would talk about modern day literature, well, just go to a bookstore and see the diversity, right? Next time, in February, we will talk about Middle English literature, and we will talk about Chaucer's poetry, that is Geoffrey Chaucer's poetry. Most notably, the Canterbury Tales. I think everybody might have heard of the Canterbury Tales. However, in this lecture, we will probably not look at the Canterbury Tales because they are long. This is a book of Chaucer's poetry. So basically everything Chaucer ever created is in here. And it's thick. And like half of it is the Canterbury Tales, which would be too much to analyze. And I would not like to ask you to read all these Canterbury Tales. I personally like Chaucer, and I will probably, most likely, but I'm not 100% sure, okay? But we will most likely have a look at a story called The Book of the Duchess. It is a long poem of around, I think, something between 20 and 40 pages. If we were speaking in that context, of course, pages can differ. I'm not sure about the... Okay, sorry, my camera just overheated, so I will finish without a camera right now. Never mind what I wanted to say. I just want to say thank you very much for tuning in. On our learning platform, you will find another 1-minute paper that you can download and write down what you have learned today. And as I said before, next time we will have a look at Geoffrey Chaucer's texts, and most likely the Book of the Duchess. I think you can find it online. Have a look at the learning platform. If you can find it online for free, I will have put a link in there. See you next time. That is at the start of February. And yeah, read you all soon. Bye bye.